The epic MLB trade deadline has come and gone here on July 31st, but the fun has just gotten started. This is the Sacchi Sports Takes podcast. Chris Sacchi here to break down everything 2025 MLB trade deadline. The Mets, my favorite team, made a ton of moves. Gregory Soto, Ryan Helsley, Tyler Rogers, as well as Cedric Mullins. The Yankees across town also did a lot. Austin Slater, Ahmed Rosario, Camilo Doval at the buzzer, as well as Ryan McMahon a few days back, and David Bednar, a huge bullpen acquisition. So I'm going to start from the top here and kind of get philosophical on you guys. So when I look at the trade deadline, first of all, a ton of fun. That goes without saying. It is so good for Major League Baseball to have this day. I'm looking at Twitter, right? It's about 5:50, and I'm updating Jeff Passan nonstop. And there's trades coming in. More and more trades. I talked about the Doval trade. That was posted by Jeff at 6 o'clock sharp. There was a trade. I was of Charlie Morton that happened after 6 o'clock. And the Griffin Jacks trade from Minnesota, a bullpen guy, to Tampa. Another big trade happening. I think that was posted at 6:14 was that updated one. So the trade deadline is so much fun. MLB Network's doing coverage around the clock. You guys know that. If you're listening to this, it means you love the trade deadline. But time to get philosophical because this is an important time in America, in sports, in the whole world, because you look at July 31st. The summer is ending its peak. The trade deadline is the perfect end to the peak of summer. June and July, to me, are the peak of summer. You have school lets out for a lot of children in May. Okay, May is like your Thursday, Friday night. You're getting everything going for the weekend. Think of me using the months as days and the days coming into the weekend. So May is like your Thursday, Friday. You can feel it. The end is coming. Another week of school, and you're getting to the weekend. Okay. So then July is like your Saturday. You have the whole day, conceivably, and that's what the summer is really all about. August is the Sunday. Hopefully, y'all going to church on Sunday. All right. But Sunday can be a day where maybe you go to church, then you go to the beach with the kids and the family, or you might do something nice, or you might be on vacation, whatever. But you still have that hovering sense of Mondays is there. It's just natural. You're looking ahead. And today's July 31st, of course. I got a notification on my phone amidst all of the trade notifications that the NFL kicked off its preseason today. So that's something there. You hear that? Fall is knocking on the door at this point in time. So the trade deadline is just a perfect end to the peak of summer, which is July. So just so much fun. And actually, it also means that the marathon of the baseball season is really over, and now comes the sprint. Football is going to start, college football is going to start, but this is when the MLB gets to be the most fun. This is when the pennant season heats up. Ironically enough, the weather's going to cool down a little bit, but Major League Baseball is about to heat up. So I want to get philosophical on you guys. Also, something that happens at late July, Collegiate Summer League Baseball wraps up. Shout out the Hamptons Collegiate Baseball League and the South Shore Clippers for winning the title a couple days back. The Cape Cod League's wrapping up. Players are going to go back to school, maybe after a little bit of time at home. So the summer, the peak of the summer is headed to its end, and we have August to look forward to, and people might go on vacation and all that. But college kids are going back to school, children are going back to elementary school, middle school, high school, whatever. So this was the end of the peak of summer. So, oops, am I muted? I'm muted. Oop, no, I'm not. Okay, sorry. Just, here we go, guys. A little bit inside baseball. You can see my lamp over here. I got my laptop here. I'm looking at my phone because the phone's better quality. And yeah, that's it. Housekeeping. Steve and I are going to be on tomorrow. We're going to lock it in tomorrow. We said we're going to do today. I know that. I'm here solo today, and I'm more than happy to do that. I love you guys. So now, after kind of giving you the philosophical take on the MLB trade deadline, I'm going to wrap up what the Mets did because I'm a Mets fan, and that's my team I love. And we're going to go in order here. Gregory Soto was was traded for, and I just immediately looked at it as this team wants to do something, and everyone knew they had to do something. You look at the Mets; they signed AJ Minter to start the year, and he was injured, tore his lat probably after the season. They also had Jose Siri, who got injured early in the year, and they replaced him with Cedric Mullins today. And you look at it from just I'm just gonna circle back on Soto and Rogers and the pitching side of it. I believe, and Ryan Helsley as well. I believe that pitching has become a kind of like the offensive line in football, right? Where it seems like everyone needs an offensive line. Everyone needs healthy offensive linemen. It's such an attrition-based sport, football, and the offensive line that guys get hurt, and you almost need two sets of offensive lines to compete at the highest level. And I think because of how many arm injuries and just overall maladies that there are in baseball on the pitching side, you need like two starting staffs. You need like three closers. I mean, you think about the top teams in the league and what they prioritized. The Mets got Rogers, Helsley, and Soto, three relief pitchers. The Yankees got Camilo Doval and David Bednar, two closers. I mean, these are teams. I'm just going to keep it in New York for now. That went out and got a really amazing pitchers. And it just reminds me of football. I remember, just to give you a little story-based example. Aaron Rodgers, when he was signed to the Jets, there was worries constantly about his offensive line, and they cropped up, and he got hurt. And it seemed like every team needed an O line. And I know there's not that many midseason trades in football, but there are in the offseason such a premium of those guys because of the attrition-based nature of it. So um, overall, I outlined the Mets moves. One thing I really want to hone in on is first the Tyler Rogers trade, because the Soto trade was a pretty reasonable package, and I'm not any expert on prospects, right? And sometimes they're just prospects. But the Soto trade was good. Got Gregory Soto, left-hand pitcher. The Tyler Rogers trade was the next domino to fall for the Mets. That happened yesterday, July 30th. Also, a really fun note is both Rogers twins were traded in the same day, both relief pitchers. Just really cool. I mean, that's got to be the first time that's ever happened in Major League Baseball. So just like from a Ken Burns baseball style narrative, so awesome that two twins were traded on the exact same day. Just shows you how beautiful baseball is and how unique it is. And like I got philosophical early in the early going, it's baseball is represents America, and this trade deadline represents the end of the beautiful peak of summer and towards the sprint of fall and children returning to school and all of that. So the Rogers trade, the Mets gave up a current relief pitcher, which I thought was interesting, Jose Budo, righty pitcher, and also righty pitcher Blade Tidwell, who's one of their biggest prospects, as well as an outfielder in Drew Gilbert. So the weird part of this that I don't especially love is that the Mets traded two major league pitchers for one major league pitcher. If you look at it just from that basis, I mentioned you need a relief core now. You need a pitching core. You almost need two sets of stabs. And the Mets traded two of those guys. Now, the thing is, they consolidated. They traded two. Budo's been a decent pitcher. He's kind of streaky. He loves to use that straight fastball. And he's been pretty good as a Met. He was good in last year's postseason run. He was somewhat reliable. And Blade Tidwell, who's been up and down and has given you some solid innings and is probably major league ready for the Giants at this point. But they consolidated those two guys for one of the best relief pitchers in baseball. Tyler Rogers is a rare breed because relief pitching, as we know in baseball, and if you don't know, I'll tell you, is very up and down. It is extremely volatile. You think about recent Mets history. The Mets trade Jared Kelenic and a package of players, Justin Dunn included in that trade, for Robbie Cano and Edwin Diaz. And Diaz was awful in his first year as a Met. And since then, has become one of the best pitchers in the league. But it takes time. Relievers go up and down. However, Tyler Rogers is a submarine guy. All right, if you're watching on video, he comes all the way down. His fingers are almost scraping the ground as he delivers the baseball from 60 feet 6 inches to home plate. And his numbers have been so reliable because of that fact. He's not relying as much on his stuff. He's relying on that funky delivery. And as a 34-year-old relief pitcher, you might think this is a lot. Drew Gilbert is the guy that the Mets got in exchange for Justin Verlander two off seasons. I'm sorry, two trade deadlines ago. Excuse my French there. That wasn't French, but you know what I'm saying. This is a guy, Rogers. You look at the back of his baseball card. He came up in 2019 as a 28-year-old, a late bloomer, but his ERA has been below 4 in every season besides 2020, which you can kind of throw in the can. He's been He led the Major League Baseball in games twice, 2021 when the Giants won 100, what, 7 games, as well as last year. And his earned run average has been phenomenal. He's a career 2.79 relief pitcher. He can save games for you. He can set up for you. And when you look at ERA plus, which 100 is the average, let me read that ERA plus since 2021. 326. That's more than three times the average pitcher. And I know he's a relief pitcher and you can rate those things differently. Either way, his ERA plus, I'm sorry, that was batter's face. His ERA plus 186, 111, 138, 137, and 216 this year. He's been out of the best relievers in baseball, he's been the most consistent. Even guys like Diaz, guys like Kenley Jansen, guys like Craig Kimbrell, guys like Josh Hader. These are Hall of Fame, potentially Hall of Fame closers that sometimes you just can't rely on. Aroldis Chapman. But Rodgers has been steady Eddie, and he is a free agent at the end of the year, which is a little bit troublesome. But the Mets are going all in for 2025. And the only note I have on Gilbert is he's at this point, the Mets had to make some decisions on some of their prospects. You can't just sit on your prospects. And eventually Gilbert had to go. He was a guy who was highly touted a couple of years ago, hasn't made the exact splash that the Mets kind of thought of. Former first round pick by Houston in 2022. This year is hitting 252, is a career 259 batter in over 1,000 at bats in the minor leagues. And although he's in Syracuse now, this just could this could be it for him. He's 25 years old, and the Mets might be thinking he's reaching a ceiling. He's not close to the major leagues, and maybe he had to be added to the 40-man roster by the end of the season, excuse me, by the offseason, or he's going to be picked in the Rule 5 draft anyway. So the Mets had to consolidate some of their prospects. And so that's the biggest move I want to highlight with the Mets. And when we think about sitting on prospects, the New York Yankees come to mind. One thing Steve and I will most likely talk about tomorrow is how often the Yankees pass on big deals. And this trade deadline for Brian Cashman, you got to give him credit because uh, fans love to poke at Cashman. Fans love to say he doesn't do enough. And in past off seasons, I'll argue he has not done enough. For a team that has been knocking on the door for the World Series for so long now, he sometimes has not pushed in all those chips for a big fish. You think of the prospects the Yankees didn't trade for guys they should have traded for, and none of them have really worked out. Miguel Andujar, Gary Sanchez, Clint Frazier, Ramon Florial. These are players, Davy Garcia. These are players who the Yankees had highly touted. They kept off the table in trades that could have helped them win games, and it didn't work out. And instead, the Yankees settled for guys like an injured Frankie Montas, passing on guys like Justin Verlander, and a midseason acquisition for Garrett Cole. But this year, they went for it. And I think my favorite move the Yankees made was the Camilo Doval move because it was so late in the trade deadline. The Ryan McMahon trade was just great from an overall basis of defense at third. He's been great as a Yankee. He had a great walk-off yesterday night. He's already performed exceptional as a Yankee. I think he's fired up to be in New York, and he's fired up to be in a winning situation after coming over from Colorado. I mean, this guy's a former All-Star player, Ryan McMahon, so great player. The Yankees made a great trade for that, and I think that was a wonderful move. But the Yankees got sexy this trade deadline. The Yankees don't usually do that. And no, they didn't get Mason Miller. They didn't get Eugenio Suarez. They didn't get Carlos Correa. They didn't get the biggest fish, but they got major league players back in return. And a lot of Yankees fans wanted Suarez, but I didn't think that was the best fit for the Yanks. And I'm happy the Mariners ended up getting Suarez because these are also the same fans that complain about the Yankees defense. And Gino is at this point 34 years old. He's been mashing for a year and a half now, but he's not a great third base defender. And so they went and shored up their defense. Amazing. But the Yankees got sexy because they got some guys, like I mentioned earlier, at the back of the pen. David Bednar was finally traded from Pittsburgh, a guy who's from Pittsburgh, who loves that city. And it was time for them to move on. It was time for him to move on and get into a winning situation. He was phenomenal. He's been phenomenal. He's got 16 saves this year. He's just been great, and he's a guy who's got a huge hook of a curveball. Doesn't throw as hard as he used to, but still great. And then how about this? The Yankees back that up by getting Camilo Doval, who and Jake Bird. Let's not forget him, another relief pitcher. So this is a team that has backed up for a big time bullpen. and that's important. And I was talking to my dad on the phone earlier today on the way back to my house. After playing a couple softball games today. Blessed to say that I can do that. And him and I made a good point. I was like, Dad, these teams used to get the big time starting pitcher. And now they're almost working backwards and getting the big time reliever and trusting the process from there. You look at the guys who were traded this, Mason Miller was the biggest name to go from the from the Oakland Athletics, not Oakland anymore, Sacramento Athletics, from Sacramento to San Diego. And now that I've kind of covered the Yankees, I'm going to get to some of the other bigger trades, but I think the Yankees made some great moves. I think the fact that they didn't trade Spencer Jones, who they rate very highly, you could say what you want about how the Yankees hugged their prospects, but in their minds, they won because they got impact players. They got Rosario, Slater, McMahon, Doval, Bird, and Bednar, and didn't trade Spencer Jones, which for them is a huge win. They didn't get Mason Miller, but you look at what it cost for the A's to trade Mason Miller. San Diego to trade away Leo DeVries, Leo DeVries, I'm sorry, Braden Nett, Henry Baez, and Edriniel Nunez. And DeVries is the third best prospect in all of baseball. He's a switch hitting shortstop who will probably be the A's shortstop when they move into Las Vegas. That's what they're looking at. And people are going to scorn AJ Preller. I think he's generally been overrated as a wheeler and dealer in the past. But at the end of the day, he's great for baseball. Can I say that right now? AJ Preller is great for baseball because he makes these fun NBA style splash blockbuster trades. He goes for it. And look, has it worked out? No. Have the Padres even made the World Series? No, they haven't. And they've traded a lot of big prospects. They traded guys like Josh Naylor when he was still a prospect, Mackenzie Gore. You could really pan that Juan Soto trade. James Wood. Look, they've given up a lot of talent. But at the end of the day, the Padres fans know they're always going to be in the mix. They're always going to try and win the World Series. And that's all you can ask for. Yeah, is it George Steinbrenner-esque to trade all these major prospects? Yeah, I think so. But it's good for the game. And I'm not a Padres fan, so I can step back and enjoy it. And that was by far the biggest trade was Mason Miller, a dominant closer for the A's going to San Diego. He's a guy who, look, I think it's unfortunate for the A's to have to trade Mason Miller. He is one of the faces of the franchise. Really fun to watch, really amazing story. But at the end of the day, he's a closer on a team that hasn't had 50 wins yet in the year, 110 games in. So that's the cost of doing business, and they needed to cash in on this in a market that is so, like I mentioned earlier, there's such a premium on good relief pitching that you needed to cash in on this Mason Miller chip after flirting with the idea last trade deadline. The Athletics have made the move to trade Mason Miller and JP Sears. So the Padres get two good arms. That's the biggest trade. I love that trade for San Diego because they have to go all in. That's just what they do. They're going to have to try and trade Dylan Cease now to offset some of the money coming in. But I think it's good for baseball. They're going for it. It's great for baseball. Also, I want to shout out the Angels, the Los Angeles Angels, because they're a team that people have also panned. They acquired Andrew Chafin and Luis Garcia from the Nationals for Jake Eater and Sam Brown. Now, Jake Eater was a former top prospect. He's become a kind of a swingman left-hand pitcher. He was a Vanderbilt guy, really highly touted. Now in his third team after being traded from the Chicago White Sox. He's had an up and down career after being a top prospect, and the Angels are going to get rid of him in favor of Chafin, who's a very well-established relief pitcher, and Luis Garcia, who's very good in his own right. Look, the Angels are 4 games back. Are they in the mix? Yeah. And people, oh, they should have sold it. They have Mike Trout on their team, and they're going for it. And I support going for it more often than not. I know you need to sometimes be wise about where you are as a franchise, but the Angels are trying to be legitimate. They have Mike Trout. He's on this huge contract. How much longer do you really want to sell and get some marginal returns for guys like Yohan Moncada, uh, guys like Luis Rengifo, who's been there now for several years and has become somewhat of a franchise mainstay? I think it's time. I like the fact that they got some pieces. I'm going to throw it back to the 2019 Mets again, who did not make the postseason, but started at 40 and 51 and bought at the deadline. They bought Marcus Stroman, and people were wondering what was going on. And the Mets ended up winning 86 games and barely missing the postseason. And if there were 3 wild cards back then, the Mets would have made that postseason run. And who knows, they were looking like a dangerous team at the time. So I just want to say that um, I'm happy when teams go for it. You got to go for it. And I know there are some teams like the Giants who ended up selling. And I found that interesting as well because they did sign Willie Adames to this huge contract. They have Matt Chapman on big money. They kind of sold low on Mikey Yastrzemski, which I don't necessarily love because he's a guy who's a franchise icon and he's been with that team for a long time. They traded him for Junior Marte, right-hand pitcher, kind of a lottery ticket guy. So I just find it interesting that the Giants sold because they're only a game under 500, but they've been struggling recently. I think that was the decision that was made. So just interesting. There were clear sellers like the Orioles who rightfully sold. There were teams like the Royals who were on the fence who kind of bought lightly. But the Cardinals sold. I like that. The Cubs could have bought more. But one other big trade too. This one's fascinating to me. This was something I thought was just going to be smoked to kind of generate some interest, generate some leverage. Uh, but the Houston Astros getting Carlos Correa back in town, back in the rodeo down there in Houston. Crazy trade. It's a stunner because I want to throw it back to a couple of years back when he was a free agent heading into the 2022 season. Maybe it was 23 season. And yeah, it was 2022 offseason. And you know, the Giants signed him to a 10-year deal, $300 million. Physical failed. The Mets then signed him to a 9-year deal, $300 million. His physical failed there. And Minnesota was the team he ended up coming back to. And it seemed like, he was that trade, there was no trade clause in that contract. And it seemed like that this was a team that he was going to be with for a while. And Minnesota ended up clearly selling. And they were somewhat still in the mix, but ownership has soured on this group as a whole. And now what's going on is Correa's going back to Houston. And I didn't think the Astros would make this trade. They have not shown an appetite to get over that threshold of the luxury tax. They entered this deadline about $4 million under that tax. And basically, it was a decision made by Jim Crane, the Astros owner, to get Correa back. He's shown an affinity, an appetite for his former stars. He let them go for financial reasons, and he misses these guys. They really wanted to re-sign Alex Bregman, and he chose the Boston Red Sox over the Astros and the Detroit Tigers as well. And they really wanted Bregman back, and it looks like they really wanted Correa back too. So really interesting. Correa will be an Astro, as is currently being told to us, as is currently stated for his contract through 2028. Out of the 135-ish million left in his deal, Minnesota's picking up 33 million. So they're picking up like almost a quarter of the contract, and they got a left-hand pitching prospect in return. It's a really electric move for Houston. When they got Ramon Urias from the Orioles, I thought that was going to be it. That this Correa thing was not going to happen. Urias doesn't really. I got to look at his contract, but Urias is not a guy who's going to skyrocket them over to the luxury tax. Instead, they are. Yeah, Urias is making exactly $3.15 million. So if they just stuck with Urias and said, okay, we're good. Urias is a Gold Glove guy who brings a little bit with the bat too. They could have been sold on that with Isaac Paredes out for the year with that hamstring injury. I thought they were going to slot Urias at third, excuse me. But the Astros got sexy. They got fun. That Carlos Correa trade is so interesting. And look, is it a perfect baseball trade? I don't know. Correa is a guy who misses time. Correa is a guy who has some detractions. He's declining as a player, and the health is always a concern for Carlos. But he's an electric player, and he's been electric in their postseason. And he's a franchise icon, even if he never came back to Houston. So the fact that Carlos Correa is going back to the Astros from the Twins is really fun. And he had to waive his no trade clause for this to go through. And he's made it clear that he also wants to be back in Houston. And he's more than willing to play third base so that Jeremy Pena, the guy who came in after him, can play shortstop. So Pena is about to come back off of the injured list. So we could very well see tomorrow, August 1st, Carlos Correa at third base and Jeremy Pena at shortstop in Boston against the Red Sox, facing off against their former cornerstone guy, Alex Bregman, who was the third baseman. So really interesting. Love the Mason Miller trade. Love the Carlos Correa trade because they're fun trades. The Yankees trades, yeah, they were smart. They were calculated. Ahmed Rosario mashes against lefty pitching. So does Austin Slater. Slater can really play the outfield and really run down some balls out there. But fun. Those were fun trades. The Yankees trades were more calculated, but I love a good fun trade. Mets also acquired Brian Helsley from the Cardinals. That was a really great trade for them. And now they have Ryan Stanek, who's a fireballer, Helsley, who's a fireballer, Diaz, who's a fireballer. And then they have, on the other side, Tyler Rogers, a submarine guy, and Reed Garrett, a split finger guy. So they have five options in the pen, and they kind of have the duality of all those guys. And Gregory Soto's a fireballer, but a lefty. So they have so many more options now than they used to, which is really encouraging for the Mets. So really amazing trade deadline. The end of the peak of summer, and right into the mix now in a sprint of the baseball season. Folks, buckle up. Going to be really fun. The only other notes I have on this, Dodgers didn't do too much. They actually traded Dustin May away. Really interesting that they kind of just didn't really go all in. Uh, don't really know what happened there. They could have acquired even just some decent arms, but that's the only trade. There was some buzz about Dalton Rushing, their backup catcher, being traded, um, but no dice. And so interesting that the Los Angeles Dodgers coming off a World Series, no moves. They traded away Dustin May. Um, they did acquire some prospects and some players in a three-way trade. How the Reds got Zach Littell, and also great for the Reds for buying. I'm happy the Reds bought. It's time these teams on the fringes with that third wild card buy. Um, but yeah, weird. Just no other notes on that. I don't know if where did the Dodgers go from here? Are they just going to run back what they have? They traded away James Outman for Brock Stewart, who is an effective relief pitcher. I'm not going to lie about that. And they got Alex Call kind of to replace Outman. He's an outfielder, but nothing entirely. It's going to galvanize your fan base on a team that has formerly traded for guys like Manny Machado at the deadline. A little bit of a sea change for LA. Maybe they just feel good about where they're at. I wouldn't. They're going to win the division. It seems like so. Nothing to really scoff at the Dodgers as the World Series champions there. What am I going to say? Really interesting other trade. The Blue Jays got Shane Bieber. Blue Jays didn't really do too much either. They kind of made this Shane Bieber thing their headline trade. And how interesting is that? Because they also got Sir Anthony Dominguez, who was traded in between doubleheaders in Baltimore as a member of the Orioles. Really interesting, really fun that just in between games, he was on the Orioles the first game, and then he was on the Blue Jays the other game as they faced off against each other. And I think he pitched against his former team too. So it's just another hilarious how unique this trade deadline is, and happening, all this activity happening in the middle of the season. But other than that, they make this gamble on Shane Bieber, who has not pitched all year because of Tommy John surgery. And the Guardians gave him a 2-year contract, helping him get on the mend. And the Guardians have not competed. And they're also a team that could have bought and could have been in the mix, but instead kind of shucked off some salary. Um, I think the fact that Clase going down is probably a big time, gut punch to them and their postseason chances. The Guardians kind of in limbo right now. So he also has a player option, does Bieber for next year. So we'll see if he stays in the fold. So interesting that they make this gamble for Bieber. There's a chance that they're doing this more for 2025, and the Blue Jays like where they're at. They have a good position player group. But either way, just fascinating. Fascinating that was the big move they made because they find themselves in first place, and the fan base is galvanized right now. The Phillies are getting Duran, I'm sorry, is electric. Duran is an electric pitcher. I mentioned Suarez to the Mariners, a little reunion there, really fun. Um, and the Rangers getting Merrill Kelly is like the only really big starter and he's not even really a big starter. Um, the Rangers made a splash to just give them maybe a guy who will start a postseason game if they make it, and they do feel very good about their chances. Um, a lot of teams in the mix right now. I mean, the Red Sox, their only move was getting Griffin. I'm sorry, their move was getting Dustin May, and that was it. Kind of like Toronto, they didn't go all in like some of these other teams, like the Yankees and Mets and the Phillies. Got Bader and Duran, which was good. Cedric Mullins, I think, is a great Mets trade. Mets need to upgrade at center, and is he's no longer the fearsome hitter that he was in 2021, but Orioles, trading that franchise icon is gotta be tough. The last one I hit on is Jose Caballero, who also, started the game as a Tampa Bay Ray, ended the game as a Yankee tonight. That was also a rain delay game, so really weird in New York. And so, he's a guy who plays shortstop, so it kind of makes you wonder, is there some souring on Anthony Volpe? I mean, Caballero can play everywhere. He can play the outfield, he can play the infield. He's a good player, um, but he can't play shortstop. So he's a guy. Derek Jeter was his favorite player growing up. He gets to play for the Yankees, but that one's interesting. So um, thank you guys so much for listening to this podcast. Tomorrow I'll be back with Steve, and I'll go over. I'll probably get philosophical on him too. But I just love talking to you guys about sports. Um, just love the support. I always say this because the podcast is still small and still growing. If you are listening to this podcast, you are a real one, and I love you. I appreciate you for all that you do to support me in my dream to talk sports. I love talking sports. I ask anyone I know, and I'm just constantly yapping and yapping and yapping about the game of baseball and sports. Love you guys. Sacchi Sports Takes podcast is going to be back with Steve Kemp tomorrow. We'll see you then.